The kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and fresh basil. Evan Kessler stood at the counter, watching his daughter's hands move with practiced efficiency as she diced tomatoes. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window above the sink, casting warm light across the cutting board where tiny red cubes piled up in neat rows. June was 17, nearly 18 now, and she had her mother's dark hair, but his eyes, gray-blue and focused. When she concentrated on something, the rest of the world disappeared. Evan recognized that trait because he'd given it to her. Focus, commitment, the ability to see a task through to completion no matter how tedious. 3 days she'd been at this. 3 full days of planning, shopping, prepping, and cooking for her grandmother's birthday party. The refrigerator was packed with covered dishes. The counter held trays wrapped in foil, each one labeled in June's careful handwriting with heating instructions and serving suggestions. 23 guests expected. 8 different dishes prepared. Every detail accounted for. Evan reached past her to grab a glass from the cabinet. His shoulder brushed hers, and she glanced up with a small smile before returning to her work. There was something fragile in that smile, something hopeful that made his chest tighten. "You don't have to do all this," he said, filling the glass with water from the tap. "I know." June swept the diced tomatoes into a bowl and reached for another. "But I want to—" Evan knew why. He'd always known why. June had spent 17 years trying to earn a scrap of warmth from Beatrice Carlyle, her maternal grandmother. 17 years of trying to be good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough to win the old woman's approval. It had never worked. Beatrice had disliked June from the moment she was born. Evan remembered standing in the hospital room, exhausted and euphoric, holding his newborn daughter while Kristen slept. Beatrice had arrived with flowers for her daughter and barely glanced at the baby in his arms. "She's very small," Beatrice had said. Her tone suggesting smallness was a character flaw. "Most newborns are," Evan had replied, keeping his voice steady. Beatrice had stayed for 10 minutes before leaving to attend a luncheon. She'd kissed Kristen's forehead, but hadn't asked to hold June. Not once. The pattern had continued for years. When June was 5 and drew a picture of her family, Beatrice had critiqued the proportion of the house. When June was 9 and got food poisoning at Thanksgiving dinner, Beatrice had called her dramatic and said she was ruining the holiday. When June was 12 and cried at a family funeral, Beatrice had pulled Kristen aside and said the girl was too emotional, too sensitive, too much. Kristen had always made excuses. "That's just how Mom is. She doesn't mean it that way. You're being too sensitive." Evan had swallowed his anger for years. He'd done it because Kristen was his wife, because he'd promised to honor the marriage, because he believed in trying to keep the peace. But watching June's tired hands stir a pot she'd woken up at dawn to finish, something was shifting inside him. Something cold and final. "Dad!" June's voice pulled him back to the present. "Yeah. Do you think she'll like the lasagna? I used the recipe from that Italian place she loves, but I added roasted vegetables because she said last time it needed more depth." Evan set down his glass. June was looking at him with those hopeful eyes, and he wanted to tell her the truth, that Beatrice wouldn't appreciate any of this, that nothing June did would ever be enough for that woman, that she was wasting her time trying to win love from someone incapable of giving it. But he couldn't bring himself to crush that hope. "Not yet. It smells perfect," he said instead. June's smile widened, and she returned to her work. Evan picked up a dish towel and started drying the pots she'd already washed. The kitchen was warm from the oven, and steam had fogged up the window above the sink. Outside, the fir trees lining their quiet street in Cresthaven swayed in the October breeze. Cresthaven was the kind of suburban town where people knew their neighbors' names and left their porch lights on at night. Middle-class houses with neat lawns, good schools, a main street with local shops that closed by 6. Evan had grown up here, left for college, and returned to raise his own family in the same safe, predictable environment. Safe. Predictable. Those words felt hollow now. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He dried his hands and pulled it out, expecting a message from work. Instead, he saw Kristen's name on the screen. The message was short. "We've decided to celebrate at a restaurant instead. Mom wants adults only. Sorry for the change." Evan read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Adults only. He stood completely still. The kitchen sounds, June humming softly, water dripping from the faucet, the oven's quiet hum, all seemed to fade into background noise. He could feel his pulse in his temples, slow and steady. June was wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She turned toward him, her face flushed from the heat of cooking, and saw him staring at his phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. Evan looked at his daughter, at the exhaustion in her eyes, at the hope still clinging to her expression, at the kitchen full of food she'd poured her heart into for 3 days straight. He walked over and handed her the phone without a word. June took it, her smile already starting to fade as she read. Evan watched the exact moment understanding hit her. Her face went slack, then crumpled, then carefully neutral, the expression of someone practiced at hiding pain. "They don't want me there," she whispered. Her voice was so small. Evan felt something inside him click into place. A decision made. A line crossed. "They don't deserve you there," he said. June looked up at him, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, but not falling. She never let them fall where others could see. She'd learned that lesson from Beatrice's criticisms. Evan took his phone back and typed a single word in response to Kristen's message. Understood. He didn't argue. He didn't beg for an explanation. He didn't ask if there was any way to change the plan. He simply accepted the information and acknowledged it. Because Evan Kessler wasn't the type of man who wasted energy on people who'd already shown him exactly who they were. June was staring at the counter, at the trays of food she'd spent days preparing. Her hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry, honey," Evan said quietly, "but we're not going to let this food go to waste." "What do you mean?" "Help me load it into the truck." June blinked, confused. "Load it? There are people in this town who would be grateful for a good meal. Let's go find them." Understanding dawned on her face, followed by something that looked like relief. She nodded and started gathering the trays. Evan heard the front door open. Kristen's voice called out from the entryway. "I'm just grabbing my purse and keys. Be right back out." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still damp from shower, wearing a dark blue dress Evan had never seen before. It looked expensive. She'd clearly bought it specifically for this dinner. Kristen's eyes swept over the kitchen, over June's red-rimmed eyes, over Evan's carefully blank expression. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't even look guilty. "I'll be back late," she said. "Don't wait up." Then she was gone, the front door closing behind her with a soft click. June stood frozen, holding a tray of stuffed mushrooms. A tear finally escaped and rolled down her cheek. "Let's go," Evan said gently. "Grab your jacket." They loaded the truck in silence. Tray after tray, carefully stacked in the truck bed and secured with bungee cords. The lasagna, the roasted vegetables, the stuffed mushrooms, the garlic bread, the salad, the homemade tiramisu. Everything June had worked so hard to create. The sun was setting as they pulled out of the driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Evan drove with both hands on the wheel, his jaw set. Beside him, June stared out the window, quiet and still. Their first stop was the Community Hope Center on the east side of town. Evan had donated money there before, but had never visited in person. The building was modest, a converted warehouse with painted murals on the exterior walls. Inside, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair greeted them. Her name tag read Patricia. "We have food to donate," Evan said. "Home-cooked meals. Is there somewhere we can bring it?" Patricia's face lit up. "Are you serious?" "Oh my goodness, yes. Follow me." They carried the trays into the center's kitchen, where 3 other volunteers were preparing sandwiches for the evening meal service. When they saw the amount of food Evan and June were bringing in, they stopped working and gathered around. "Did you make all of this?" one of the volunteers asked June. June nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am. Honey, this is incredible. We'll be able to feed twice as many people tonight. Thank you so much." June's shoulders straightened slightly. "You're welcome." They stayed to help serve the food. Evan watched his daughter hand out plates to people who thanked her with genuine warmth, who told her the food was delicious, who asked if she'd consider volunteering again. One older man with weathered hands told her the lasagna was better than his late wife's, and that was saying something. June smiled, a real smile this time. After the community center, they drove to St. Michael's Church, where Father Rodriguez ran a weekly outreach program. Then to a small recovery home on the north side, where women in various stages of addiction recovery lived together and supported each other. At every stop, people were grateful. At every stop, June stood a little taller. It was nearly 10 o'clock when they finally returned home. The truck was empty. The kitchen was quiet. Kristen hadn't returned yet. Evan locked the front door and turned to find June standing in the hallway, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Dad, yeah. Why did you marry her? Mom, I mean, if Grandma was always like this, why did you marry into that family? It was a fair question. Evan leaned against the wall and considered his answer carefully. Your mother wasn't always like this, he said finally. When I met her, she was different. She stood up to her mother. She made her own decisions. But over the years, I don't know, maybe Beatrice wore her down. Maybe it was easier to just give and then keep fighting. People change, June. Sometimes not for the better. June nodded slowly. I don't think she's going to change back. No, Evan agreed. I don't think she will either. They stood in the quiet hallway for a moment longer. Then June hugged him, quick and fierce, before heading upstairs to her room. Evan remained standing in the hallway long after her bedroom door closed. He pulled out his phone and opened his messages with Kristen. Read her text again. Mom wants adults only. Not, we think it would be better. Not, maybe June would be more comfortable. Just a cold, simple dismissal of their daughter from a family celebration she'd worked for 3 days to contribute to. Evan made a promise to himself right then, standing alone in his quiet house. This family would never hurt June again. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Evan woke at 6:30, made coffee, and started breakfast. June came downstairs around 7, already dressed for the Saturday errands they'd planned. Her eyes were still puffy from crying herself to sleep, but she'd pulled her hair back and put on a brave face. They were sitting at the kitchen table eating scrambled eggs when the front door opened. Kristen walked in wearing yesterday's dress, her heels in one hand, her purse in the other. She looked tired, but not apologetic. There was something almost defensive in the way she held herself as she entered the kitchen. She set her purse on the counter and immediately noticed the empty refrigerator shelves through the open door. Where's the food? She asked. Evan took a sip of his coffee before answering. We donated it. Kristen's head snapped toward him. You what? We gave it to people who needed it. The Community Hope Center, St. Michael's, a few other places. Why would you do that? Her voice was rising now, sharpening with anger. Mom specifically said she wanted leftovers. She was going to take some home for the rest of the week. Evan set down his coffee mug with deliberate care. The food went to people who appreciated it. You embarrass me. Kristen's face was flushing red. Do you have any idea what I had to tell people last night when they asked about June's cooking? Mom was furious that I couldn't even bring her leftovers. June flinched beside him, but Evan kept his eyes locked on his wife. No, he said quietly. Your mother embarrassed herself when she excluded our daughter from a family event June spent 3 days preparing for. Kristen opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Something in Evan's tone had registered with her. Something cold and final she'd never heard before. This is ridiculous, she finally said. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. Mom just thought it would be more relaxing with adults. June wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. Did you ask her? Evan's voice remained level. Did you ask June if she wanted to come to her grandmother's birthday dinner? Kristen's jaw tightened. I don't need to ask. I know my own daughter. Do you? The question hung in the air between them. June stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm going to my room. She left without looking at either of them. Evan listened to her footsteps on the stairs, heard her bedroom door close. Not slam, just close with careful control. Kristen was staring at him with a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. She'd expected him to cave, to apologize, to smooth things over the way he'd always done before. But Evan wasn't doing that anymore. I need to get changed, Kristen said finally, breaking eye contact. I have a meeting at 11. She walked past him toward the stairs. Evan stayed seated at the kitchen table, listening to her movements above, the closet opening, drawers sliding, water running in the bathroom. She left 20 minutes later without saying goodbye. Evan sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about patterns. He was a systems engineer by trade, trained to recognize when something was functioning properly and when it needed to be fixed. For years, he'd watched the pattern of his wife choosing her mother's comfort over their daughter's well-being. He documented it mentally, but never acted on it. That was his mistake. He believed in the sanctity of marriage, in working through problems, in giving people chances to change. But Kristen had shown him repeatedly who she was, someone who would sacrifice June's happiness to avoid conflict with Beatrice. Evan didn't make decisions based on emotion. He made them based on evidence, on patterns, on logical conclusions drawn from observable behavior. And the pattern was clear. He stood up, cleared the breakfast dishes, and walked upstairs. He knocked on June's door softly. "Come in." She was sitting on her bed with her laptop, probably trying to distract herself with schoolwork or social media. She closed it when she saw his face. "I need to ask you something," Evan said, sitting down in her desk chair. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." June's expression became wary. "Okay, has this been happening behind my back? Things with your grandmother. Things with your mother." Silence stretched between them. June's hands twisted in her lap. "You can tell me," Evan said gently. "I promise I won't be angry at you, but I need to know the truth." June took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Grandma, she says things about me, about how I look, how I act. She told Aunt Rachel that I was getting fat last Christmas when she thought I couldn't hear. She said my laugh was too loud at Easter. She told Mom that I dress like I'm trying too hard." June paused, tears starting to fall. "When I was 9 and got sick at Thanksgiving, she said I did it on purpose for attention. She called me a burden." Evan's hands clenched on the arms of the chair, but he kept his expression calm. "What did your mother say when these things happened?" "She said Grandma didn't mean it, that I was being too sensitive, that I needed to have thicker skin." June wiped at her eyes. Sometimes Mom would defend her, say that Grandma was from a different generation and I needed to understand her better. "How long has this been going on?" "As long as I can remember." June's voice broke. "I thought if I just tried harder, if I was better, quieter, more perfect, maybe she'd like me. Maybe they'd both see me differently." Evan stood up and sat beside her on the bed, putting his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him and cried properly now, the kind of deep shaking sobs that came from years of stored-up hurt. He held her and said nothing. Sometimes there were no words that could fix what had been broken. When her tears finally subsided, June pulled back and looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because I should have told you. Because I let it get this bad. Because—" "Stop." Evan's voice was firm, but not harsh. "None of this is your fault. You understand me? None of it." June nodded, but he could see she didn't quite believe him. "Your grandmother has treated you terribly. Your mother has enabled that treatment. And He had a pause, had to swallow past the anger at himself. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you better. That's on me, not you. What are you going to do?" June asked. Evan looked at his daughter, this bright, kind, talented girl who'd spent 17 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to her. "I'm going to fix this," he said. Act N1. The law office of Tully and Associates occupied the second floor of a brick building on Main Street. Evan had called that morning and gotten an appointment for Monday afternoon by claiming it was urgent. He sat across from Gavin Tully, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Tully had been practicing family law for 30 years and had a reputation for being thorough, strategic, and successful. "Tell me about your situation," Tully said, pen poised over a legal pad. Evan had brought everything. Years of text messages saved on his phone, screenshots of group chat conversations, photos of June's work for the birthday party, documentation of every event he could remember where Beatrice had mistreated June and Kristen had defended her mother. He walked Tully through the entire history, starting from June's birth and moving chronologically through 17 years of systematic emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics. Tully took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His expression remained neutral, professional. When Evan finished, Tully set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Mr. Kessler, I need to be frank with you. Washington is a no-fault divorce state, which means neither party needs to prove wrongdoing to file for divorce. However, when it comes to custody decisions, the court's primary concern is the best interest of the child. Understand, based on what you've told me and the documentation you provided, you have a strong case for primary custody. Very strong. Tully tapped his pen against the legal pad. Your daughter is 17, nearly 18. The court will likely give significant weight to her preferences about custody arrangements. And the pattern of emotional harm from the maternal grandmother, combined with your wife's failure to protect your daughter from that harm, creates a compelling argument. How long will this take? That depends on whether your wife contests it. If she agrees to your terms, we could have everything finalized in a few months. If she fights it, Tully shrugged, could take longer. But Mr. Kessler, I want you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Family members will take sides. Your wife will likely feel betrayed and may lash out. Are you prepared for that? Evan thought about June's tears, about the hope in her eyes when she handed out food to grateful strangers, about 17 years of watching his daughter try to earn love she should have been given freely. I'm prepared, he said. They spent another hour going over details, filling out initial paperwork, discussing strategy. By the time Evan left the office, it was nearly 5 o'clock. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and pulled out his phone. He'd been thinking about this part all day, wondering if it was too vindictive, too cruel. But then he remembered June's face when she read that text message, and his resolve hardened. Truth wasn't cruel. Truth was just truth. He opened his family group chat, the one that included 43 relatives on both sides. Kristen's parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. His own extended family. All of them in one convenient thread where they shared updates, photos, celebration announcements. Evan typed carefully, I want to share what happened this weekend. June spent 3 days preparing 8 different dishes for Beatrice's birthday celebration. 23 people were expected. On the day of the party, Kristen messaged to say the venue had changed to a restaurant and June was excluded because Beatrice wanted adults only. June was not told until after she'd finished all the cooking. This is not the first time Beatrice has excluded or mistreated June. I'm attaching photos of June's work and past messages for context. He attached photos of the kitchen full of prepared food, screenshots of particularly cruel messages from Beatrice that Kristen had shared in past family chats, documentation of previous events where June had been excluded or criticized. He didn't editorialize, didn't add emotional appeals or accusations, just stated the facts and provided evidence. His finger hovered over the send button. This would burn bridges. This would cause chaos. This would hurt people. But those people had hurt his daughter first. He pressed send. Then he turned off his phone and drove home. June was at the kitchen table doing homework when he arrived. She looked up as he entered, and he could see the question in her eyes. I saw a lawyer today, Evan said. June's pencil stopped moving. You're divorcing, Mom. It wasn't a question. Yes. Because of me. Because of both of us, Evan corrected. Because your mother has shown me repeatedly that she values her mother's feelings more than your well-being. Because I won't watch you suffer anymore. And because you deserve a home where people actually see you and value you. June was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Now we wait. Your mother will be served with papers in the next few days. We'll work out custody arrangements. You'll get to tell the court what you want. He sat down across from her. June, you're almost 18. You could technically refuse any custody arrangement you didn't like. But I want you to know that wherever you choose to be, I'll support you. I want to stay with you, she said immediately. Then that's what we'll fight for. June nodded, then returned to her homework. Evan made dinner, something simple, just grilled chicken and rice, and they ate in companionable silence while the sun set outside the kitchen window. His phone was still turned off. He knew what was happening in that group chat. Phones were lighting up all over Cresthaven and beyond. Family members were reading his message, looking at the evidence, forming opinions. Some would defend Beatrice and Kristen. Some would be shocked. Some would be angry at him for airing family business. He didn't care. The next morning, Evan turned his phone back on. It immediately exploded with notifications. Hundreds of them. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. He scrolled through them while June got ready for school. Most were from relatives he barely knew, people reaching out with varying degrees of shock, support, and outrage. His sister, Monica, had sent a simple message, "About damn time. Call me when you can." Kristen's brother, David, had written, "I had no idea Mom was treating June this way. I'm so sorry. Please tell June I love her." Kristen's youngest sister, Emily, had sent multiple messages ranging from defensive, "You're taking things out of context," to uncertain, "I remember some things that make more sense now." There were angry messages from Beatrice's friends, supportive messages from family members who'd suspected something was wrong, confused messages from people trying to understand what had happened. And then there were Kristen's messages. 12 missed calls, 6 voicemails, 23 text messages. Evan read through them chronologically. "What did you do? My phone won't stop ringing. How could you do this to my mother? You've humiliated us. Everyone thinks we're terrible people. My own family is turning on me because of your lies. This is emotional manipulation. You're going to regret this. Call me back right now. I'm coming home. We need to talk." The final message had come in at 1:47 a.m. "I know what you're planning. David told me you went to a lawyer. If you think you're taking June from me, you're insane." Evan deleted none of the messages. They were all evidence. June appeared in the kitchen doorway with her backpack. "Is it bad?" she asked, nodding at his phone. "It's exactly what I expected. Mom knows." "Yes." June bit her lip. "What do I do if she shows up at school?" "She won't." Evan stood up and handed her his truck keys. "Take my truck today. If she does show up, you call me immediately, and I'll be there in 5 minutes. June took the keys, hesitated, then hugged him quickly before heading out the door. Evan spent the morning working from home, fielding calls from family members. He kept his responses brief and factual, neither defending himself nor attacking Kristen. He simply stated what had happened and let people draw their own conclusions. By noon, he'd heard through the family grapevine that Beatrice had suffered what her friend were calling a minor medical episode from stress. She'd gone to the emergency room complaining of chest pains and been kept for observation. Evan felt nothing about this news. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a distant acknowledgement that actions had consequences. He was making lunch when someone started pounding on the front door. Bam, bam, bam. "Evan." Beatrice's voice, shrill and furious, cut through the wood. "Open this door right now." Evan set down his sandwich and walked calmly to the door. He unlocked it and pulled it open. Beatrice stood on his porch, her face mottled red with rage. She looked smaller than he remembered, shrunken somehow, but her fury filled the space around her. Behind her stood Kristen, eyes red from crying, and 2 of Kristen's cousins, women who'd driven up from Seattle to provide support. "You told lies about us." Beatrice spat, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You ruined my reputation. My friends are calling asking if I really said those things to June. My bridge club is whispering about me. The church is gossiping about how I treat my own granddaughter." "I didn't lie about anything," Evan said evenly. "I shared exactly what happened, with evidence. Those messages were private. You had no right. They were in a family group chat. They stopped being private the moment they were sent to 43 people." Beatrice tried to push past him into the house, but Evan blocked the doorway with his body. She was forced to step back. "You've made me look terrible," she shrieked. "No," Evan said, his voice quiet and cold. "You look terrible because you treated my daughter terribly. I just made sure people knew about it." June's voice came from behind him. "Dad, I came home for lunch. I heard shouting in." She stopped when she saw who was at the door. Beatrice's eyes locked onto her granddaughter. For a moment, something almost like regret flickered across her face. Then it hardened back into anger. "This is your fault," Beatrice said to June. "You've always been too sensitive, too emotional, making mountains out of molehills. I never did anything wrong. You just take everything the wrong way." June's face went pale, but she didn't back down. She stepped forward until she was beside Evan in the doorway. "You told me I was getting fat," June said quietly. "You call me a burden. You said my laugh was too loud and my clothes were wrong and I was too much. You did that. Not me. Kristen finally spoke, her voice cracking. June, baby, you have to understand, Grandma didn't mean those things the way they sounded. She was just trying to help you. And you've always been sensitive. You know that. I'm not sensitive for having feelings, June said, her voice stronger now. And she meant exactly what she said. You just never wanted to admit it because it was easier to blame me. One of the cousins shifted uncomfortably. The other was staring at June with a look of dawning realization. Beatrice opened her mouth to respond, but Evan cut her off. This conversation is over. June, go inside. But, inside? Now. June hesitated, then obeyed. Evan heard her footsteps retreat into the house. He turned back to the women on his porch. Kristen was crying silently. Beatrice was trembling with rage. The cousins looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Here's what's going to happen, Evan said calmly. Kristen, you'll be receiving divorce papers within the week. I'm filing for primary custody of June. If you contest it, we'll go to court and let a judge decide based on the evidence I've compiled over the past 17 years. If you're smart, you'll agree to reasonable visitation and we can keep this relatively civil. You can't do this, Kristen whispered. I can. I am. Evan looked directly at Beatrice. And you're no longer welcome in this house or around my daughter. If you contact June directly, I'll consider it harassment and pursue a restraining order. Beatrice gasped. You wouldn't dare? Try me. The two women stared at each other. Beatrice was the first to look away. This isn't over, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Yes, Evan replied. It is. He stepped back and closed the door in their faces. Locked it. Stood there listening as they argued on his porch in hushed, angry whispers. Eventually, car doors slammed and an engine started. He waited until the sound faded before turning around. June was standing in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. I told people, she said. Evan's head snapped up. What? I told my guidance counselor, Ms. Rivera. I told her everything that happened this weekend, and she asked if she could share it anonymously on the school's community board. It's this website where parents and students can post about local issues and get advice. She said what happened to me was a form of emotional abuse and that other kids might be going through similar things with their families. Evan's mind raced. When did you do this? Last night, after you went to bed. June's hands were shaking. I'm sorry. I know you were handling it, but I needed someone else to know. Someone who wasn't family. And Ms. Rivera has always been nice to me, and I trust her, and... June! Evan crossed the hallway and put his hands on her shoulders. You don't need to apologize. You did nothing wrong. But now the whole school probably knows. And their parents. And she stopped, realization dawning. Oh no, that's why Grandma said her church was gossiping. That's why her friends were calling. Evan felt a strange sense of satisfaction settle over him. That's brilliant, he said. What? June, your grandmother has spent decades building a reputation in this town. She volunteers at the church, plays bridge with the prominent families, attends every community event. Her entire identity is wrapped up in being seen as respectable and proper. He smiled grimly. And now everyone knows exactly how she treats her own granddaughter. That's not my doing. That's hers. June was still processing this when her phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. She pulled it out and stared at the screen. It's people from school. They're messaging me, saying they're sorry this happened, that they went through similar things with their families, that they're proud of me for speaking up. More messages kept flooding in. Teachers, parents of classmates, even people June barely knew. Ms. Rivera posted an update. June said, scrolling through her phone. She says the response has been overwhelming. She's organizing a support group for students dealing with difficult family dynamics. She says, June's voice caught. She says I'm helping people by telling my story. Evan pulled his daughter into a hug. Over her shoulder, he could see through the front window to the empty street where Kristen's car had been parked minutes ago. He thought about Beatrice's face when she'd been forced to confront her own cruelty. About Kristen's tears not of remorse, but of embarrassment at being exposed. About the cousins who'd witnessed everything and would spread the story further through the family grapevine. Truth was a powerful weapon, and Evan had just deployed it with surgical precision. The divorce papers were delivered to Kristen on a Thursday afternoon. Evan had requested they be served at her workplace, a small accounting firm where she'd worked for 8 years. He knew it would humiliate her, having a process server show up at her office. He also didn't care. She came to the house that evening. Evan had been expecting it. June was upstairs doing homework when Kristen let herself in with her key. Evan heard the door open and closed the laptop he'd been working on. He walked into the living room to find his wife standing in the entryway, still wearing her work clothes, holding the manila envelope. "You didn't have to serve me at work," she said. Her voice was flat, exhausted. "I want to make sure you got them. Everyone saw. Everyone knows now." "Good." Kristen's face crumpled. "How can you be so cold? We've been married for 18 years. 18 years, Evan. And you're just throwing it away like it means nothing." "I'm not throwing anything away," Evan said calmly. "You threw it away. You've been throwing it away every time you chose your mother's feelings over our daughter's well-being. That's not fair. My mother is difficult. Yes, but I was trying to keep the peace. I was trying to maintain family relationships." "At whose expense?" Kristen didn't answer. "At June's expense," Evan continued. "Every single time. You let your mother criticize her, exclude her, belittle her. And when June came to you hurt, you told her she was too sensitive. You gaslit our daughter into thinking her very reasonable emotional responses to mistreatment were character flaws." "I didn't." "You did. You absolutely did. And I have documentation proving it." Evan crossed his arms. "I've saved every text message where you defended your mother after she said something cruel about June. Every email where you made excuses. Every conversation where you told our daughter she needed to try harder to win your mother's approval instead of telling your mother to treat her granddaughter with basic respect." Kristen sank onto the couch, the envelope falling from her hands to the floor. "I didn't realize it was that bad." "Yes, you did. You just chose not to care." "That's not true. I love June. She's my daughter. I would never intentionally hurt her." "Intent doesn't matter, Kristen. Impact does. And the impact of your choices has been 17 years of emotional damage that June will probably need therapy to process." Kristen was crying now, but Evan felt no urge to comfort her. He'd comforted her through countless crises over the years: her father's death, her job stress, her mother's demands. He'd been the stable one, the logical one, the problem solver. But he was done solving problems for someone who kept creating the same ones over and over again. "I want to talk to June," Kristen said. "No, she's my daughter. You can't keep me from her." "I'm not keeping you from her, but you don't get to ambush her in her own home. If you want to talk to June, you can schedule a time. We'll sit down together, all three of us, and have a conversation. You don't get private access to manipulate her into taking your side." "I wouldn't manipulate her." Evan just looked at her. Kristen wiped her eyes and stood up, grabbing the envelope from the floor. "The papers say you're seeking primary custody." "Yes." "You really think a court will take a daughter away from her mother?" "I think a court will prioritize what's best for June. And what's best for June is not living in a home where she has to walk on eggshells around her own family. I can change. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll tell her she can't talk about June that way anymore. Kristen, you've had 17 years to do that. You didn't. You won't. And even if you suddenly developed a spine where your mother is concerned, the damage is already done." Kristen's face hardened. "You're going to regret this. You think you have everything figured out, but you don't. You've turned my entire family against me. My mother is having health problems because of the stress you've caused. And you're acting like you're the hero in this story when really you're just vindictive and cruel. I'm protecting my daughter. If that makes me cruel in your eyes, I can live with that." "Fine." Kristen's voice turned ice cold. "Then we'll do this the hard way. I'll fight you on custody. I'll drag this through court. I'll make it as difficult and expensive as possible. And when June turns 18 in 7 months, she'll be able to choose for herself. And she'll choose me because I'm her mother and she loves me." "If you truly believe that," Evan said quietly, "then you haven't been paying attention for the past 17 years. Kristen left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Evan stood in the living room, listening to her car peel out of the driveway. Above him, He heard June's bedroom door open and her light footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "I heard everything," she said. "I figured. She's going to fight for custody. She's going to lose." June walked over and sat on the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. What if she doesn't? What if the court says I have to live with her part of the time? What if? June. Evan sat down beside her. In 7 months, you turn 18. Even if somehow, and I mean somehow, because our lawyer is very good, the court ordered shared custody, it would only be temporary. You'd age out almost immediately. And at that point, you can choose to never see your mother again if that's what you want. "I don't want to never see her," June said quietly. "I just want her to actually see me." "I know." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, darkness had fallen. The streetlights cast orange pools of light on the pavement. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the block. "Dad," June's voice was small. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. Your mother will hire a lawyer. They'll file a response to the divorce petition. We'll go through mediation, try to reach an agreement on asset division and custody. If we can't agree, we go to court and let a judge decide." "How long does that take?" "Could be a few months. Could be longer if she really fights it." June nodded, processing this. "And Grandma? What about her? Is she really having health problems?" Evan thought about this carefully before answering. "Your grandmother went to the emergency room with chest pains. The doctors found nothing wrong. No heart attack, no medical emergency. Just stress." He looked at his daughter. Some people, when they're confronted with the consequences of their actions, develop physical symptoms. It's a way of making themselves the victim, of redirecting attention and sympathy away from the people they hurt. So she's faking it, not necessarily faking. The symptoms might be real, but they're self-inflicted, brought on by her own guilt and embarrassment. And that's not your responsibility to fix. June leaned her head against his shoulder. "This is all so complicated." "It's actually pretty simple," Evan said. "Your grandmother treated you badly. Your mother allowed it. I'm putting a stop to it. Everything else is just noise." The next few weeks passed in a strange limbo. Kristen hired a lawyer, a woman named Sandra Pierce who had a reputation for being aggressive in custody cases. Pierce filed a response to the divorce petition that painted Evan as controlling and emotionally abusive, claimed that he'd manipulated June into turning against her mother, and argued that Kristen should have primary custody because of her closer bond with their daughter. Gavin Tully read the response with barely concealed amusement. "This is weak," he told Evan during their meeting. "They're throwing everything at the wall hoping something sticks, but they have no evidence. Meanwhile, we have 17 years of documented emotional neglect. What's our next move? We depose some family members. Get statements from people who've witnessed Beatrice's behavior toward June and Kristen's failure to intervene. We also want to depose June's guidance counselor, Ms. Rivera. Her testimony about June's emotional state and what June disclosed to her will be powerful." Evan nodded. "What about June herself? Will she have to testify?" In Washington, children over 14 can express their custody preferences to the court. June's nearly 18, so her wishes will carry significant weight. She'll likely meet with a guardian ad litem. That's an attorney appointed to represent her interests and possibly testify if this goes to trial. Will it go to trial? Tully shrugged. "Honestly, I think Kristen's lawyer will advise her to settle once she sees the evidence we have. Going to trial would be expensive and public, and Kristen has already suffered significant reputational damage in your community. A trial would make things even worse." "Good," Evan said. At home, life continued with an almost eerie normalcy. June went to school, worked on her college applications, spent time with friends who'd rallied around her after Ms. Rivera's anonymous post. Evan worked from home most days, maintained the house, made dinner every night. Kristen had moved into a small rental house across town. She'd been granted supervised visitation with June twice a week. Supervised because Tully had argued that Kristen might try to manipulate June into changing her testimony or custody preference. The visitations were awkward and tense. They met at a neutral location, a family services center with a mediator present. Kristen would try to make small talk about school or friends, but the conversations felt stilted and artificial. June answered politely, but without warmth. After the third visitation, June came home and said, "She keeps talking about memories of when I was little. Happy times we had together. Like she's trying to remind me that we used to be close." "Were you close?" Evan asked. June thought about it. "Maybe when I was really young. Before I was old enough to notice that Grandma didn't like me and Mom always took her side. After that, I don't know. I just remember trying really hard to be good enough and never quite making it." "That's not your failure. That's theirs." June nodded, but Evan could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. That was the insidious thing about emotional abuse. It made you question your own perceptions, made you wonder if maybe you really were too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. It would take time for June to unlearn those lies. But they had time now. Time and space and safety. 2 months after Evan filed for divorce, something unexpected happened. Kristen's brother David called him directly. "I need to talk to you," David said. "Can we meet somewhere? Just the two of us." They met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, neutral territory. David looked tired. He'd lost weight since Evan last saw him, and his usual confident demeanor seemed diminished. "I owe you an apology," David said once they'd sat down with their coffees. "I didn't realize how bad things were. With Mom and June. I knew Mom could be critical, but I thought it was just, grandparent stuff. Being old-fashioned. High standards." "It wasn't," Evan said. "I know that now." David ran a hand through his hair. "After you sent that message to the family, I started thinking back, remembering things. The way Mom would talk about June when June wasn't around. The way Kristen would defend her. I confronted my mother about it, and she—" He trailed off. "She what?" "She said June had always been difficult. Said she was doing the family a favor by trying to correct her behavior before it got worse. Said Kristen should have been stricter with her discipline." David's jaw clenched. "She actually said that June needed to learn her place in the family hierarchy." Evan felt a cold fury settle over him. "And what did you say?" "I told her she was never allowed around my kids again. My daughters are 11 and 9, and now I'm wondering what she's been saying to them when I'm not around." David met Evan's eyes. "I'm testifying for you. In the custody hearing. Tully's office already contacted me, and I said yes. I'm going to tell the court exactly what kind of person our mother is and how Kristen enables her. That's going to destroy your relationship with your sister. Kristen destroyed our relationship when she chose Mom over her own daughter. I'm just acknowledging it." David took a sip of his coffee. "My wife wanted me to tell you something. She says if you need any character witnesses, people who can testify about what kind of father you are, we'd be happy to do it. You've always been good to June. You deserve primary custody." Evan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "Thank you. Don't thank me. I should have spoken up sooner. We all should have." David stood to leave, then paused. "How's June doing?" "Really? She's stronger than I gave her credit for. She's going to be okay." "Good. Tell her Uncle David loves her, and I'm sorry I didn't protect her better." After David left, Evan sat in the coffee shop for a while longer, thinking about family and loyalty and the courage it took to admit you'd been wrong. The custody hearing was scheduled for March. By that point, June would be 3 months from her 18th birthday. But both Tully and Pierce agreed that it was still worth going through the legal process to establish Evan's primary custody for the remaining months and set terms for any future relationship between June and Kristen. Kristen's lawyer tried one more time to push for mediation and a settlement. Tully declined. "My client wants a formal custody determination from a court," he told Pierce. "We're not settling." The message was clear. Evan wanted a legal record of why June should be in his custody. He wanted a judge to officially state that Kristen had failed her daughter. He wanted it documented so there could be no revisionist history later, no claims that this had all been a misunderstanding. 3 days before the hearing, Beatrice tried to contact June directly. June's phone rang with an unknown number. She answered it, thinking it might be related to her college applications. "June, is that you?" June recognized her grandmother's voice immediately. "How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter. I need to talk to you. Please don't hang up." June looked at Evan, who was sitting across the kitchen table. He mouthed "speaker," and June tapped the button. Beatrice's voice filled the kitchen. "June, honey, I know things have been difficult between us, but I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm sorry if anything I said ever hurt your feelings. If June's voice was steady. You're sorry if your words hurt me? Well, sometimes I can be too honest, too direct. I'm from a different generation, and we didn't coddle children the way people do now. But I never meant to hurt you. You're my granddaughter. You called me a burden when I was 9 years old. Silence on the other end of the line. You said I was getting fat. You said my laugh was too loud. You made fun of my clothes and my friends and everything about me. June's voice was getting stronger. And now you're calling because you wanted to tell the judge that everything's fine so Mom can get custody. Right? That's not. I mean, yes, I'd like you to consider your mother's feelings in all this. She's heartbroken, June. She misses you terribly. And your father has poisoned you against her. My father protected me, June said firmly. From you. From Mom. From anyone who thought it was okay to treat me like I was worthless unless I was perfect. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being honest. And I'm done with this conversation. June hung up. Her hand was shaking, but her expression was determined. Evan felt pride swell in his chest. His daughter had found her voice. Record that conversation? He asked. June nodded. I started recording as soon as I recognized her voice. Ms. Rivera taught us about documentation in the support group. Smart. They sent the recording to Tully, who added it to their evidence file with barely suppressed glee. Beatrice just admitted to being too honest and too direct with a minor child, and she's on record trying to manipulate June into changing her testimony. This is perfect. The custody hearing took place in a small courtroom with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting. Judge Patricia Okoye presided, a woman in her 60s known for being no-nonsense and focused on children's welfare above all else. Evan sat with Tully at one table. Kristen sat with Piers at another, looking smaller than Evan remembered, her face pale and drawn. June wasn't in the courtroom yet. She'd meet separately with the guardian ad litem first, then potentially testify depending on how the proceedings went. The hearing began with opening statements. Piers painted Kristen as a devoted mother who'd made some mistakes, but ultimately loved her daughter and deserved to maintain a strong parental relationship. Tully was more direct. He outlined years of documented emotional neglect, provided evidence of Beatrice's abuse and Kristen's enabling, and argued that June's best interest required primary custody, with Evan and strictly limited contact with her mother until Kristen completed family therapy and demonstrated real behavioral change. Then came the witnesses. David testified first, describing what he'd learned about his mother's treatment of June and his sister's failure to intervene. He was calm, factual, and devastating. Ms. Rivera, June's guidance counselor, testified about June's emotional state when she'd first disclosed the birthday party incident. She described June as a young woman who'd been systematically taught to doubt her own perceptions and blame herself for others' cruelty. 3 of June's teachers testified about changes they'd noticed in her behavior over the years, how she'd become increasingly withdrawn and anxious, especially around family events. 2 family friends testified about incidents they'd witnessed at gatherings where Beatrice had criticized June and Kristen had remained silent. By lunchtime, the evidence against Kristen was overwhelming. Piers tried to salvage the situation by putting Kristen on the stand. Kristen testified about her love for June, about how she tried her best as a mother, about how she'd been caught between her daughter and her own mother and hadn't known what to do. I made mistakes, Kristen said, crying on the stand. But I love my daughter. I would never intentionally hurt her. Tully's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Kessler, you received a text from June 3 months ago where she wrote, "Grandma, call me stupid again. Can you please talk to her? Do you remember that text?" Yes. What did you respond? I don't remember exactly. Let me refresh your memory. Tully pulled up the exhibit. You wrote, "Your grandmother doesn't think you're stupid. She's just frustrated because you need to focus more in school." Is that correct? Yes. June had a 3.8 GPA at the time. She was on the honor roll. Why did you tell her she needed to focus more in school? Kristen's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. You were deflecting, Tully continued. Instead of addressing your mother's verbal abuse, you blamed June for somehow causing it. How many times did you do that over the years, Mrs. Kessler? I don't I was trying to keep the peace. At whose expense? Silence. At your daughter's expense. Repeatedly. For 17 years. Kristen broke down crying. Pierce called for a recess. After lunch, it was June's turn. She'd met with the guardian ad litem that morning and given a detailed account of her experiences. Now she sat in the witness box, looking small but determined. Judge Okoye smiled at her kindly. June, I know this is difficult. I want you to know that you can take your time with your answers, and you can ask for a break if you need one. Thank you, Your Honor. Can you tell me, in your own words, what you want the court to know about your relationship with your mother? June took a deep breath. I love my mom. I do. But she never protected me from my grandmother. And whenever I tried to tell her that grandma was hurting me, she told me I was too sensitive or that I needed to try harder. She made me feel like it was my fault that my own grandmother didn't like me. How did that make you feel? Like I was broken? Like there was something wrong with me? June's voice was steady, clear. I spent years trying to fix myself, trying to be perfect enough that grandma would love me and mom would be proud of me. But it was never enough. And now I understand that it was never about me. It was about them. Where do you want to live, June? With my dad. He's the only person who's ever consistently made me feel safe and valued. He's the only one who believed me when I said grandma was being cruel. He's the only one who protected me. What about your mother? Do you want to have a relationship with her? June hesitated. Maybe someday. If she gets help. If she can learn to choose me over grandma. But right now, no. I don't want to live with someone who makes me feel like I have to earn basic respect. Thank you, June. That's very brave. Pierce tried to cross-examine, tried to suggest that Evan had coached June or manipulated her into saying these things. But June's answers were too consistent, too emotionally authentic to be fabricated. She'd lived this truth for 17 years. When June stepped down from the witness box, she walked past her mother without looking at her. Kristen sobbed openly. Judge Okoye called for a 30-minute recess to review the evidence and testimony. When she returned, her decision was swift and unequivocal. I've reviewed all the evidence and heard testimony from multiple witnesses, including the minor child herself. It's clear to me that June has suffered significant emotional harm in her mother's care, primarily due to Mrs. Kessler's failure to protect her from her maternal grandmother's verbal and emotional abuse. She looked directly at Kristen. Mrs. Kessler, your love for your daughter may be genuine, but love without protection is insufficient. You repeatedly chose to maintain peace with your mother rather than defend your child. That is a failure of parental responsibility. Kristen looked like she might collapse. Therefore, I'm granting Mr. Kessler primary physical custody of June. Mrs. Kessler, you're granted supervised visitation twice per month, contingent on your completion of family therapy and your agreement to maintain no contact between June and her maternal grandmother. If you cannot agree to that condition, visitation will be suspended until June turns 18. Pierce stood. Your Honor, we'd like to request. My decision is final. Counsel, this court's primary concern is the child's welfare, and June has made her preferences abundantly clear. Given that she'll be 18 in 3 months, I see no reason to force a relationship she doesn't want. The gavel came down. Evan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Asset division was straightforward. They split everything 50-50, and Evan kept the house since June would be living with him. Kristen agreed to the judge's conditions. She enrolled in family therapy and signed a formal agreement never to facilitate contact between June and Beatrice without June's explicit consent. Beatrice herself had become something of a pariah in Crest Haven. Her bridge club found reasons to exclude her from games. Her church volunteer coordinator gently suggested she take a break from her duties. Neighbors who used to chat with her at the mailbox suddenly had urgent business elsewhere. The truth had consequences. 3 months after the custody hearing, June turned 18. Evan woke her up with birthday pancakes and a small wrapped gift, a necklace with a compass pendant. So you always know which direction you're going, he said. June hugged him tightly. Thank you, Dad, for everything. That afternoon, they drove to the lake, the same lake where they'd gone to the farmer's market during those difficult months. It was May now, and the water sparkled under bright sunshine. Families dotted the shoreline, kids running and laughing. They walked along the water's edge, neither of them feeling the need to fill the silence with words. Some things were better felt than said. I got accepted to the University of Washington, June said eventually. I know. You told me last week. I've decided. That's where I'm going. Evan glanced at her. Not Oregon State? I thought you were excited about their program. I was. But UW is closer. Only 2 hours away. And I thought. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I thought maybe I want to come home sometimes. On weekends or holidays. If that's okay. June, you're 18 now. You can come home whenever you want. This will always be your home. She smiled. And it was the real smile, bright and genuine and free. They stopped at a bench overlooking the water and sat down. A family nearby was having a picnic, the parents laughing as their toddler chased a ball across the grass. Have you thought about talking to your mom? Evan asked. It was the first time he'd brought it up since the custody hearing. June was quiet for a long moment. Her therapist reached out to me. Through Ms. Rivera. She said Mom is making progress. Learning to set boundaries with Grandma. Working on, what did she call it? Acknowledging her parenting failures. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Part of me wants to believe she can change. Part of me thinks it's too late. June picked at a loose thread on her jacket. Ms. Rivera says I don't have to make any decisions right now. That it's okay to wait and see if Mom's changes are real or just for show. That's good advice. Do you think she'll really change? Evan considered this carefully. I think your mother is capable of change. Whether she actually does it, whether she prioritizes your well-being over her mother's approval permanently, that remains to be seen. But June, you don't owe her anything. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not your presence. Those are gifts you can choose to give if and when you feel ready. June leaned her head against his shoulder, just like she used to do when she was small. I'm glad you're my dad. I'm glad you're my daughter. They sat like that for a while, watching the sunlight dance on the water. A year later, Evan stood in June's dorm room at the University of Washington, helping her move in for her sophomore year. The room was small but bright, with a window overlooking the campus quad. June's roommate, a cheerful girl named Lily who was studying engineering, bounced into the room with another box. Your dad is so much cooler than mine, Lily announced. My dad tried to reorganize my desk 3 times according to optimal workflow principles. Very annoying. June laughed. My dad just lets me be messy. That's because I've learned to pick my battles, Evan said, hanging up the last of her clothes. Lily disappeared back into the hallway, and June turned to Evan with a more serious expression. I had coffee with Mom last week, she said. Evan set down the empty box he'd been folding. How did that go? It was okay. Not great, but okay. She's still in therapy, still working on things. We talked for an hour, and she only mentioned Grandma once. And when she did, she actually defended me instead of her. That's new. That's progress. I told her I needed more time, that I wasn't ready for regular visits or family dinners or anything like that. Just coffee once a month, maybe. Casual. No pressure. What did she say? She cried. But she agreed. June sat down on her bed. Her therapist says she's dealing with a lot of guilt, realizing how much she messed up, how much time she wasted being afraid of her mother instead of protecting me. Guilt can be productive if it leads to actual change. That's what I'm waiting to see, if the change is real. June met his eyes. But Dad, even if she does change completely, even if we eventually rebuild some kind of relationship, you're still the parent who showed up for me. You're the one who protected me. That doesn't change. Evan sat down beside her. I should have done it sooner. Maybe, but you did it when it mattered most. That's what counts. They finished unpacking, then went to dinner at a small restaurant near campus. Lily joined them, along with 2 other students from June's floor. They talked about classes and professors and campus life, and Evan watched his daughter laugh freely with her friends. This was what safety looked like, what freedom looked like. On the drive back to Cresthaven, Evan thought about the past year, about the divorce, the custody battle, the restructuring of their lives, about June's slow healing, her growing confidence, her rediscovery of joy. He thought about Kristen, who was genuinely trying to change, but might never fully repair what she'd broken. He thought about Beatrice, who'd lost nearly everyone in her quest to be right, to maintain control, to avoid admitting fault. And he thought about forgiveness. Evan Kessler wasn't the type of man who forgave easily. He believed in consequences, in accountability, in protecting the people who mattered to him. He'd been called cold for it, ruthless, unforgiving. But watching June thrive now, seeing her confidence return, knowing she was safe, he had no regrets. Some bridges were worth burning if it meant protecting the people on your side. 2 years after the divorce, on a crisp October afternoon, Evan received an unexpected letter. The return address was from an assisted living facility in Seattle. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Evan, I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect a response. But my doctor says I should try to make amends for my mistakes while I still can. So here we are. I was wrong. About June. About how I treated her. About the things I said and the things I implied, and the 1,000 small cruelties I inflicted because I was too proud to admit that a 17-year-old girl was better at cooking and planning and caring than I ever was. I told myself I was trying to toughen her up. That criticism would make her stronger. That showing weakness, which is how I interpreted kindness, would ruin her. I was wrong about all of it. June didn't need toughening up. She needed to be seen and valued and loved without conditions. She needed a grandmother who celebrated her instead of diminishing her. She needed protection from my sharp tongue and sharper judgments. Kristen tells me June is doing well at university, that she's thriving, happy, surrounded by friends, that she's in therapy to work through the damage I caused. I'm glad for her, truly, and I'm sorry I won't get to know the woman she's becoming, because by all accounts, she's extraordinary. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm simply acknowledging that you were right. You protected your daughter from people who hurt her, and that makes you a better parent than I ever was. Take care of her. Keep her safe. Let her know that her grandmother finally understands what she lost. Beatrice." Evan read the letter twice, then set it down on his kitchen table. He felt nothing. No satisfaction at Beatrice's admission of guilt. No anger at the years of damage she'd caused. No pity for an old woman facing the consequences of her choices. Just nothing. He took a photo of the letter and texted it to June with a simple message. "Your call if you want to respond." June's reply came an hour later. "I don't need to respond. I don't need her apology or her acknowledgement. I just need to keep moving forward. Thank you for sending it, though." Evan deleted the photo and filed the original letter away in a folder he kept in his desk. Documentation, evidence, proof that he'd been right all along. 3 years after the divorce, Evan attended June's college graduation. Kristen was there too, sitting on the opposite side of the auditorium. They'd texted about logistics beforehand, who would sit where, when they'd each take photos with June, how to avoid awkward encounters. It was civil, polite, distant. Kristen had continued her therapy and had even started setting boundaries with Beatrice before the old woman's health declined significantly. She'd apologized to June multiple times in therapy sessions and private conversations. June had accepted the apologies but kept her mother at arm's length. "I appreciate that she's trying," June had told Evan, "but trying doesn't erase what happened. We have a relationship now, but it's not the relationship she wanted. It's the relationship I'm willing to give." At the graduation ceremony, Evan watched June walk across the stage to receive her diploma in psychology with a minor in social work. She decided to dedicate her career to helping young people navigate difficult family dynamics, to being for others what she wished someone had been for her earlier. After the ceremony, June found Evan in the crowd and hugged him tightly. "We did it," she said. "You did it. I just made sure you had space to succeed." "That's everything, Dad. That's literally everything." They took photos, went to dinner with some of June's friends, celebrated late into the evening. At one point, Evan stepped outside the restaurant for some air and found Kristen standing by the parking lot, smoking a cigarette. "Didn't know you smoked," he said. "Started recently. Therapist says it's better than some of my other coping mechanisms." She took a drag and exhaled slowly. "She looks happy." "She is. Because of you." Evan didn't respond to that. Kristen turned to look at him directly. "I spent 3 years in therapy trying to understand how I became someone who would hurt my own daughter to avoid disappointing my mother. You know what I figured out? What? I was never brave. I watched my mother criticize everyone around her for years, and I was terrified of becoming her target. So I aligned myself with her, became her ally, sacrificed my daughter to maintain my own safety. Kristen's voice cracked. I was a coward. Yes, Evan said simply. You were. Kristen laughed bitterly. You never pull punches, do you? No point in lying now. No. She stubbed out her cigarette. For what it's worth, I'm glad you got her out. I'm glad you were brave enough to blow up our family to protect her. Someone needed to be. She walked back inside before Evan could respond. He stood in the parking lot for a few more minutes, thinking about courage and cowardice, about the choices people made and the consequences they lived with. Then he went back inside to celebrate his daughter's achievements. 5 years after the divorce, Evan got a call from June on a Tuesday evening. Dad, are you sitting down? Should I be worried? No, the opposite. I'm engaged. Evan felt a surge of joy, followed immediately by protective instinct. Engaged? To who? When did this happen? Do I need to have a conversation with this person? June laughed. His name is Thomas. We've been dating for 2 years. You've met him 3 times, Dad. He's the history teacher who took us to that museum exhibit last year. The one with the bad jokes? The one with the dad jokes, yes. I love his terrible humor. Her voice softened. He makes me feel safe, Dad. He makes me feel valued. He never makes me feel like I need to earn his respect or prove my worth. He just loves me as I am. Then he's a smart man. Will you walk me down the aisle? The wedding's next June. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. Of course I'll walk you down the aisle. Nothing could keep me away. Mom asked if she could come. Is that okay with you? Evan considered this. June, it's your wedding. Your day. You invite whoever you want to be there. I want both my parents there, even if you can't stand to be in the same room. We managed at your graduation. We'll manage at your wedding. June was quiet for a moment. Thank you. For everything. For protecting me when I needed it. For giving me space to heal. For showing me what a parent is supposed to be. You're easy to protect. Easy to love. After they hung up, Evan sat in his living room. The same living room where he'd made the decision 5 years ago to end his marriage and fight for his daughter, and felt a deep sense of peace. He thought about the path they'd taken, the battles fought, the bridges burned, the relationships fractured and reformed into new, healthier shapes. He thought about young June in the kitchen, cooking for days to win her grandmother's approval, and about the woman she'd become, confident, kind, purposeful, loved. Some people called him ruthless for what he'd done, unforgiving, cold. But Evan knew the truth. He wasn't ruthless. He was simply a father who'd learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means being willing to destroy anything that threatens them. And he'd do it all again without hesitation. The wedding was beautiful, small and intimate, held at a botanical garden with June's closest friends and family in attendance. Thomas's vows made everyone cry. June's made everyone laugh and cry. Kristen attended with her new partner, a quiet woman named Angela who worked as a librarian. Kristen kept her distance from Evan, respecting the boundaries they'd established over the years. But when June hugged her mother before the ceremony, Evan saw genuine love in the embrace. Complicated, careful, but real. Beatrice had passed away 6 months earlier. Her funeral had been small. June had not attended. When asked about it, June had simply said, "I don't owe her my grief." Evan understood. As he walked June down the aisle, her hand tucked into his arm, he thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The kitchen full of unwanted food, the drive to donate it, the confrontation with Beatrice, the custody hearing, the years of healing, every difficult decision, every burned bridge, every consequence accepted. All of it had been worth it for this moment. Watching his daughter, confident and radiant, walking toward a future she'd chosen for herself, with someone who valued her the way she deserved to be valued. June squeezed his arm as they approached the altar. "Love you, Dad," she whispered. "Love you too," he whispered back. He placed her hand in Thomas's, stepped back, and watched his daughter begin a new chapter of her life. A chapter written on her own terms, free from the people who'd tried to diminish her. Evan sat down in the front row, and felt something he'd spent years fighting for finally settle into place. His daughter was safe. His daughter was happy. His daughter was free. And that was everything.